Welcome. Welcome to Leaders Transforming Global Consciousness, a virtual oasis to support and empower people to step forth and take next steps toward making a difference in these crucial times in which we live. Our session today is titled Writing an Inspirational Memoir, and I am honored to share with you Diana Raab. Dr. Raab is a memoirist, poet, a blogger, speaker, an award-winning author of 12 books and numerous articles. She's a regular blogger for Psychology Today, Wisdom Daily, and Thrive Global, and frequently speaks and teaches on writing for healing and transformation. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you so much, Christian, for inviting me.
Well, thank you for blessing us with your presence and your wisdom. So you've got a PhD in psychology with a concentration in transpersonal psychology. Your research focus was on the healing and transformative powers of memoir writing. Your latest books are Writing for Bliss and Writing for Bliss Companion. So I want to start there because I got to tell you, for me, writing and bliss, sort of like an oxymoron, two words that don't belong together. It might even be contradictory. So sort of like open secret or military intelligence. For me, writing is work. So please enlighten me and enlighten anybody else in the audience who struggles with writing.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that you're struggling so much because you've written a really great book and you're writing more, I'm sure. But for me, I've been writing since the age of 10. And so for me, I always found my peace and empowerment when I've been writing. And so writing for bliss means that it's my happy place. When I write, I feel joy, I feel enlightened, I feel just good. I feel like my heart center is throbbing. And when I don't write, my family knows that I become a little grouchy. And so they say, go to your office and write. So it's just been that way for my whole life. I mean, I've been writing for, I'm afraid to say, almost 6 decades. And so it's just my thing. Some people like talking, I like writing.
Is this something you feel can be learned, like this appreciation and enjoyment of writing?
Well, I think to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. And a lot of people who don't like writing very often, not always, don't like reading as much. And so reading inspires us to write. And yes, it can be learned. I think, taking workshops and that kind of thing definitely can be inspiring and informative. But again, you've got to go, you got to go to where your heart sings.
Yeah, no, and I get the reading part of it. Reading, I love. I've been reading. I grew up in Cuba my first 10 years of life, and we had a TV, but there was nothing really worth watching. So we grew up reading, and for that, I'm really, really grateful because I've developed this lifelong love affair with reading and words. It's the passion for writing that you talk about that I lack. It's like, for me, it's a means to an end. It's a means to get a message out there and to impact lives. So you also write, which I thought was an interesting phrase, to read like a writer. What does that mean?
That means to read in a way, like I always tell my students to read work that inspires them and work that they want to emulate. And so reading like a writer means just reading a book, for example, or an article, and perhaps even highlighting the sections that resonate with you, make you feel, oh, wow, I wish I could say that. And then if you do that enough times, then you will emulate good writers. And that's the best form of flattery, isn't it? When you're emulating good writers that you love. And I also tell people to read books. If you like one author, you like one of their books, chances are you like all their books, because what you're really loving is the voice. So writers often don't change their voice from book to book unless they're changing from fiction to nonfiction. So stick with the same writers, read all their work if you can.
Let's talk about journaling for a moment, because how journaling can save your life is one of your titles. And you write that you've made journaling a part of your daily practice. And again, that's another one that I've never been able to get to or practice or chosen to develop that muscle. So you write that writing helps me identify my priorities and life's essential questions. It's a way for me to learn who I am and who I am yet to become. I firmly believe in the power of writing to heal and transform. And so this is your invitation to journal. And I know that many people in this summit have a sense of mission, have a message that they'd like to share. Would you share with them how journaling serves, how it makes a difference?
Well, I would say in general, journaling helps increase your self-awareness. And if you increase your self-awareness, then you can figure out what brings you joy in life, and then helps you also figure out what your life's passion is. Sometimes, and the most successful journaling exercises are ones where you do stream of consciousness writing. So what I do with my students is I say to just pick a pen, pick a paper, pick a journal that you love, and just write for 15 minutes, whatever's on your mind. You can start out writing about, and if they have trouble starting, I say, just start by saying, today I feel happy. And you can start writing about why you feel happy. You might end up talking about people that you love or people that you've had a disagreement with. You might end up talking about someone you met at the supermarket. Stream of consciousness writing has no beginning, middle, and end. It's just getting out on the page what's going on in your subconscious mind. And that's where we tap into some real jewels, getting into that subconscious mind.
Yeah, that reminds me of Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, where the practice is to write first when you get up in the morning, and I forget whether it's half an hour, 20 minutes, whatever she recommends. But it's just stream of consciousness, like get whatever's in your mind onto the pages without purpose, without trying to figure out what you're writing for or who you're writing for. It's just that practice.
Yeah, and for some people, mornings don't really work. If they have young children, that doesn't work out. So whatever time of day works for you, and it is just getting it out on the page. And then, the following day, and the idea is really also to put the date on top of the page. And the next day, you might want to explore one of the things that you talked about the day before. Maybe you've spoken about a deceased relative that you miss, or someone that is dying, perhaps. And you might want to explore that person's life a little bit. So it's kind of like a tree, you have the basis, and then you just branch out to other things of interest to you at that particular time. Now, we don't always feel like writing about the same things. And so what I have my students do, especially when they begin writing a memoir, is go through all their old journals, because most of my students are regular journalists, and circle what resonates with them, even going back decades or years or months, and because chances are those thoughts or feelings or images or emotions still resonate with them. And if they resonate with them, then they'll probably resonate with their readers if they're thinking of getting published.
And do you find for somebody who hasn't published yet, who hasn't written with that intention yet, do you think that that memoir writing is a good way to begin?
Well, it really depends. I think, the idea of memoir writing is important to have a focus. You can't just, unless you're like a celebrity or someone in the limelight. First, we have to distinguish between what a memoir is. A memoir is basically about a slice of life, and it has a focus. An autobiography is about a whole entire life from A to Z. So not everybody is cut out to write a memoir. People most often write memoirs about something tragic that happened or something good that happened. But there has to be a focus. There has to be a theme running through it, whether it's that you lost a loved one, whether it's that you had an illness, whether it's that you had a transformative moment, maybe you had a altered experience with drugs, or microdosing, which seems to be a big thing right now. So it's about a theme. Memoirs typically have a theme.
And in your own case, what inspired your passion for writing?
What inspired my passion for writing? I've been writing since I'm 10 years old. And what started it is my mother and father both worked full time. And my grandmother, I'm an only child. My grandmother was my caretaker when my parents went to work. And it was actually Labor Day weekend. I knocked on her door. I believe it was Monday. My parents were at the retail store. I knocked on her door, and she wasn't answering. And so I went inside, and what ended up happening is she had committed suicide. And I found her and called my parents, and the ambulance came, and lot of chaos. And that was the basis of my first memoir, which is Regina's Closet. She had taken an overdose of sleeping pills, and my mother, it was the 60s, my mother had no idea, because I was very close to my grandmother, had no idea how to help me heal, because she was dealing with her own trauma. So she was an English major in college, and she ended up handing me a Cahill Gibran journal. And she said, I just want you to write your feelings. And I would sit in my room for hours on end writing. So I learned from a very early age that writing heals, writing makes you feel better. You know, that was a time in the 60s when therapy was not really talked about. And I actually think if my grandmother had therapy, she probably would not have taken her life. So my passion started then when I was 10 years old. And then I used journaling going through a difficult adolescence in the 60s, being a hippie, trying experimental drugs, walking barefoot in the park, walking with the American flag around my shoulders. I was a real rebel. And so I did that. And then I was on bed rest with all three of my children. So I wrote about those times. And my first book actually was about difficult pregnancies. Then my 2 cancer diagnoses. So every time I went through a challenging time in my life, I turned to writing because I knew from an early age that it made me feel better.
That's really interesting. And I'm sorry for your loss, by the way, especially at that young age. You wrote in your newsletter today, incidentally, that September is National Suicide Prevention Month, which I didn't know. And you have personally lost 7 loved ones to suicide. And one of the things that surprised me about your newsletter is that the rate of suicide has actually dropped during the times of the pandemic. So 2 questions about that. Did you work out through your sense of loss, your grieving, through your writing with each of those suicides? And in terms of the pandemic part of the question, how do you figure that? How do you figure, like, I would have assumed that the rate of suicide had increased.
Yeah, those are great questions, Christian. Actually, the 7 people that committed suicide was my grandmother was the first. Then I was a childhood friend I was 13. She ran out in front of a car. Then it was a mentor, because I was a nurse in my past life, a mentor. Then it was 2 writing friends. And yes, I did write to heal. I wrote about each one of them to help me with my own healing process. In terms of the pandemic and the numbers, I totally agree with you. It feels like the numbers have increased. And I think in the beginning they were higher, especially in school-age children, because they were, especially kids that are coming from very high-risk homes where there might have been abuse before and everybody's kind of locked in on top of one another. Abuse was the numbers were high. I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but I think as time went on during the pandemic, people were finding that they were near loved ones and they were having more support perhaps than they might have had outside of the pandemic. And, if you know anyone that's a psychotherapist, and I have a number of friends that are psychotherapists, they say their practice is they have turning people away. People are reaching out when they need help now, much more than they might have done before. And so I think that is helping people feel less alone. And so I think that's one of the reasons, if I can just speculate, why the numbers have gone down. People are reaching out.
That is so interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah. So, I also related to your story because you're the child of 2 immigrant parents. How did that immigrant experience influence your writing?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I really don't know. Other than the fact that my parents were never home because they were immigrants and they worked so hard just to have a roof over our head, back in the 60s. And so I don't really write much about that. I just know the effects of it were that I was very lonely as a child because they were not home. And as an only child, and a grandmother who was pretty much present for the first 10 years of my life, but after that, she wasn't. And I was like basically what we call now a latchkey kid. So I think the loneliness definitely led me to write more.
Yeah, fair.
My dad died in 1991, and I was really close to him. I still have not written about him. I wrote one poem. He was a Holocaust survivor.
Hmm.
Had a hard time writing about him because of how much I loved him. I thought, and this is one thing I tell my students, if you've had something traumatic happen to you, the distance will help you write about it. It's very difficult. Journaling is a good tool to use if something's happening to you in the moment. But in terms of writing a memoir, the most important aspect of writing a memoir is being able to look back with a different perspective onto an experience. And so it's very hard to write a memoir in the present time. You know, it's always easier because we get perspective as we get on in years. So back to your original question, I really don't know other than the loneliness factor. Sorry, I rambled there a bit.
No, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. So you've been speaking about it already, but if I were going to ask you directly, how does writing heal and facilitate transformation? Is there anything else that you would want to add to that?
Well, as I said, the first thing is self-awareness. The second thing would be it helps you be present in the moment. Like we talk a lot about mindfulness now when we're talking about transformation. And so that is also extremely empowering, and just tapping into the subconscious mind. Some things that we just have no idea are there. I mean, sometimes my students write about things. They said, they might write about a sister that passed away as they're doing this stream of consciousness writing, and they hadn't thought about her sister in years, maybe 40 years. And suddenly they're saying, oh, well, maybe that's really deep inside me and I need to tap into that. So in that way, that could be healing, because keeping things inside, as we know, is not healing.
And so again, going back to the audience of the summit, that I know many people have been feeling this call to write, or in some cases, I'm sure for years. So for someone who has never written, how do you suggest they begin?
How do I suggest they begin? Well, first is to get a journal and to do stream of consciousness writing every morning. The next thing to do is I would suggest, and there will be a handout that I will be giving out about tips on writing a memoir. But I think in order to figure out what you want to write about, because most of us at a certain point in our lives, I'm 67, I've certainly had enough experiences that I can write about. So what I would do would be to make a list of, what I would suggest is to make a list of 5 transformative moments in your life. Whether it's, like a suicide, a loss, an illness, a connection, a love affair, whatever that might be. And then pick that one and really dig into it further. Like, which is the one that resonates? Pick the one that resonates with you right now, this moment in time, and start writing. And I would just say write vignettes, and then you can go to the second one and work your way down the list. The most difficult part, Christian, about writing a memoir is really the organization of it. And so if you just have these, sections, and then you finally put it together like a puzzle, because life doesn't happen chronologically, it happens in terms of theme. So if you get your themes down, that's the most important thing. And also, writing is also a muscle. That has to be used. So you've got to write every day, whether it's a poem.
Yeah, no, you were going to say whether it's a poem or
whether it's a poem or an essay or a whatever you might be writing, an article, a blog. It's just a muscle that needs to be practiced every single day.
This might be helpful, and I don't know if it's something that you relate to, but my genre is nonfiction, and my first book, I got an advance from one of the New York publishers, and I missed the first deadline. They didn't give me that much time. They only gave me 9 months. But every time I thought I have to write a book, I would just freeze. I would numb out. It was overwhelming. I'd never written a book before. And so once I missed the deadline, plus I was dealing with I really didn't want to be in the public eye. And yet I felt at the same time anointed with a sense of mission. And so once I missed my first deadline, I thought, all right, now I really have to do this, because I spent the third of the advance that they had already given me. And so then I had a breakthrough, which was to break it down into smaller pieces. Like I thought, right, I'm not going to write a book. I'm just going to think of each chapter as a term paper. And I've done a bunch of term papers. I know how to do a term paper. And so that's how I got through it. Just a little bit, a bite at a time.
Good.
Is that something that you teach your students about the writing process?
Yes, I do. And that's what I was trying to explain about, listing the 5 transformative moments in your life. And so that would be kind of breaking down, like you can think of each of those transformative moments as a chapter, perhaps in your book in the future. I don't know. But if there's a theme running through it, excuse me, we all have themes running through our lives, whether it's love, whether it's, loss, whether it's, teaching, whether it's, we all have some theme, something that we always gravitate to, and healing, whatever that might be. And so that's absolutely a fantastic idea, is just breaking it down. I love the idea that you've done all these term papers.
Yeah.
I bet you wrote a lot about awakening the soul of power.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't even thinking about that then when I was doing term papers. I saw on your website too something that piqued my interest, and that was your conversation cards for meaningful storytelling. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, interesting. Thank you for asking. So it's my latest creative endeavor. So my book, excuse me, my last book that came out was Writing for Bliss, and which was inspired by my students who said, you need to write a book, because when I go home after your course is finished, I need to have your presence with me. So thank you for writing that. But as a sidekick of that, I thought, well, and this was inspired actually by the pandemic. We're on Zoom, we're on phone calls with family and loved ones. And I came up with these cards. Actually, it was a student that inspired me, because I have students from UCSB help me here. She came into the office one day right before the pandemic, and she said, so I went to visit my grandma this weekend, and you inspired me to get to know my grandmother. And so I asked her, Grandma, tell me a story. And Grandma's like, what? I have so many stories. What do you want me to tell you? And she didn't know what to ask. This 20-year-old college student, she didn't know. She didn't have the experience or the perspective. So we brainstormed a bit, and we said, well, maybe this is a good thing for college students, or grandparents, questions to ask. And so, sorry, I just left the camera for a second. So the
That's
conversation cards for meaningful storytelling are a collection of cards that ask questions that stimulate conversations on Zoom calls, could be on dates, could be with grandparents. Things like, what is the most amazing thing that ever happened to you? What is the best trip you ever took? What was your favorite food as a child? What did you love doing as a child? And it stimulates the conversation. So if the student went to her grandmother and said, well, Grandma, what did you do when you were a child? And suddenly she'd say, oh, well, I had the bicycle and I went to the park. And then it stimulates this conversation where the student says, well, I was never able to do that because it was so dangerous. And so it gets the good dialogue going. And so I was really excited, and I found a really fantastic artist, because I'm in love with feathers, and she made feathers all over the cars. And I see you peacock in the background. So
Yeah.
something in common there. And so, so that they're available on Amazon. I'm really excited about bringing that out into the world. And really, the timing was just great right before the pandemic.
Oh my God, yes. Have you had people write to you reporting that they used it for dating? Like when they first met somebody?
Yeah, I had one person say that, because dating wasn't so prominent during the pandemic.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
But they did Zoom dating. And so I heard some people were using it for Zoom dating.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think I may have had a breakthrough in understanding what you mean by writing is bliss.
Oh.
So let me run this by you. So I'll replace the word bliss with ecstasy.
Okay.
Which literally means out of yourself, like popping out of yourself, popping out of the small self, popping out of the ego self, is my interpretation of that. So is it fair to say that when you're like deep in the process of writing, you're so into it that you're popping out of that crazy monkey mind, that endless constant internal monologue that drives us crazy, and that we're actually focused on one thing, and that pops us out of time and out of ourselves into that sense of timelessness.
Yes, absolutely. When I'm doing my best work, I go into what I call a trance. I mean, the people will knock on the door, people will call me for dinner, people will call, and I'll just like, I don't hear anything because I am so into my work and so focused. So yes.
I love that. Okay, now I get it.
Okay,
I
good.
wasn't going there with bliss, but I can get ecstasy.
You like ecstasy better. Well, to me, I equate ecstasy with a drug, so I don't use that in my work.
Yeah.
But whatever term, resonates with you, that's good. Yeah.
See, I that's the opposite happens to me. I associate bliss with those unitary moments of oneness, of in deep inner peace. And so, but I see now, I can understand the ecstasy part of it.
Yeah.
So your educational background also includes health administration and nursing. How does your healthcare background influence your work? And for the many healers that are here in the summit, what message of advice, message of empowerment do you have for them?
Well, how does it influence? Well, because my path has always been healing. I started out as in health administration. I was managing a chronic care hospital when I lived in Montreal. So that was a healing thing. Then I went right after I graduated from nursing school. And then I got my MFA in writing, and then I got my PhD in psychology. So I've always been on a healing, helping path. And so, and from physical and psychological, obviously, as well. And what was your second question about?
Message of advice or empowerment for a healer, somebody who identifies as a healer, or maybe even struggles with owning that word.
Message of advice in terms of writing?
Or of anything, just
Okay.
of in relationship to being a healer.
Okay, that's a really great question. So, in relationship to being a healer, I think healers need to remember to take care of themselves. Self-care is really important because burnout is really prominent, especially, for the healers now during the pandemic. And healers very often do forget themselves. And so it's important to do at least one thing a day for yourself, whether it's, take a bath, go swimming in a pool if you have one, go for a walk in nature. Nature is very healing. Going for a walk or whatever brings you peace. Meditating. I meditate every day. I've been meditating since 1977, tried various different techniques. But self-care is really important as a healer. I would say that that's number one for me on the list for advice for healers.
That's great. And so along those lines, one of the articles that you wrote that intrigued me was that practicing intuition for self-care. Would you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, that's going to be a big part of my next book coming out, but I'm not talking about it because I'm superstitious. But, well, intuition is something that my grandmother taught me, like following your instincts, because we all have instincts. The problem is the ego gets in the way. We don't trust ourselves, and we let our mind get in the way. So I always tell people to get in touch with their heart center and see what your heart wants and what your heart feels, because your heart knows. Your heart knows the answers. So that's all about intuition for self-care, that somebody calls you, like this week was crazy for friends needing help. One person had surgery, another one was having a psychological breakdown, and here I am, and I was having some challenges myself, just in terms of being grounded. And I had to stop and say, okay, well, I need to go for a walk in nature. I need to have my feet on the earth. And so I think, of course, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, it's just about grounding yourself and being present so that you can help others. It's just like they say that when you fly in the airplane, if you're traveling with a child or someone that can't put the mask on themselves, make sure to put the mask on yourself first.
Yes. I use that same metaphor when I'm teaching about self-care.
Good.
Yeah. You also write about survivor's guilt, and especially during these times of pandemic, where maybe many of us have experienced more of that than usual. What are some words of advice or wisdom that you can share with on that theme?
Well, that's a really tough one because you can only do what you can do, and I think, especially since this whole pandemic and everything has become politicized and choice orientated. And I think you just have to do what you think is right for you. Everybody's different. We can't judge. We can no longer judge. We can no longer offer advice unless we're asked for it. We have to do what's right for ourselves. And for our loved ones, if they ask. I've got 3 kids in their 30s, and I only give advice if they ask, because, who am I?
Mm, mm,
Why are my thoughts better than theirs or not? Only if they need my thoughts, then I will share them. But I think that's really helped me a lot. Just
yeah,
that mantra.
yeah,
I
yeah.
can give my wisdom through my writing. I give my wisdom because I know my reader doesn't necessarily ask; they get it.
Yeah,
I get whatever I feel. So, but again, it's always being in touch with your heart center and your gut feeling. Your intuition is in your solar plexus, which is basically down near your gut. And so, when I have trouble figuring out answers to things, I just direct all my energy to that area, and I get my answer.
so say a little bit more about that for somebody who doesn't know how to access their intuition or even how to drop into their heart center. How do we do that?
Well, practice. It's a lot of practice. It's just
Mhm.
not letting your mind get in the way. I mean, we all have flashes of intuition. We just kind of push them aside. And I think it's just a matter of, it's also who you hang around with, who you connect with. If you hang around with people that are intuitive, then chances are you will be intuitive. But if you hang around with people that are not, it's very hard to pick up that vibe. There's, a lot of books on intuition, and, those are out there for sure. But it's really listening to your heart center.
Yeah. Is your belief that we all have access to that? It's just a matter of learning how to access it?
I think so. I think it's practice for sure. I think we all, but some people are more tuned in than others. And there's studies have been done that, and this will be in my next book, that those who've been traumatized early in life tend to be a little bit more intuitive because that was their means of survival.
Hmm.
So, whether it's mental or physical trauma. So it's just, they needed to survive in a way. And so they had to really, and really intuition is all about observation, isn't it? It's all about paying attention. It's about
Yes.
observation. It's
Yes.
not so much about the answers coming to you. It's about being aware of what's around. It's self-awareness and awareness of everybody else.
Yeah. And being present to
And being
that.
present, extremely important.
Mhm. And that helps understand your why your grandmother was so unusually intuitive. The
Yes.
fact that she'd had trauma in early life. Um,
Yeah, which I
let's
don't
talk.
talk about here very much. Well, it's in my book, Regina's Closet, but she was orphaned in World War I, and she lost her parents when she was, I think she was 11. And that's pretty traumatizing. And then
Mhm.
moving to a new country. So yes, that's exactly why, might have been why she committed suicide. Plus, you're right, Christina, that's one of the reasons that she was very intuitive.
As we began to wrap up our time together, you also write about one of the themes that also resonates with me, because I also teach about that and have retreats on that theme, is knowing our soul's purpose. And so again, keeping in mind, number of people in this summit who maybe have a sense, maybe they even have an intuitive hit that what they're doing is not fulfilling, is not soul level satisfying. Or maybe on the other end of the spectrum, they know that their job or whatever they do to with their time is like is like devouring the very life force out of them. How do we know? What are some of the ways that we can know our soul's purpose? Like, what are we really doing here at a soul level, at a mission level?
No, that's another, you ask really good questions, by the way. Did I tell you that before? I'm repeating myself. Um, that's a great question. So again, it's being in touch with your heart center, and like, does your heart flutter when you're, obviously when I'm writing, I realize that I feel really good when I'm doing it. So it must be connected in some way to my soul's purpose, whether it's healing or bestowing information. So it's what brings you joy. Like, where do you feel the best? You know, if you're, and I think the pandemic has illuminated a lot of people because they realize, oh my gosh, I hate going into the office. I much rather work at home. So, and at home, well, I can't really do that job. Well, what job would make me feel better? So there's been more reflection time during the pandemic, which maybe there was a reason for it. Maybe we just all
Yeah.
needed it. And
Yeah.
so I think that has helped people figure out their soul's purpose. Just being alone, being in
Yeah.
nature can help you figure out your soul's purpose. Journaling can help you figure out your soul's purpose. And I think basically we all know what we're here for. It's just a matter of tapping into it, especially when you get to a certain stage in life. You know, we're not, if you're in early college years. I think my grandson just came home from kindergarten today, and he lives in Florida, and the kid, you know, they had to hold a little sign of how old he is and what he wants to be when he grows up. And he said, I want to be a scientist. And it'll be interesting to see if that's what he becomes. But in his heart, that feels right now. My other granddaughter wants to be a baker. Who knows, you know?
Who knows?
But it's something that's touching into their heart center. They feel good when they're studying science, feel good when they're baking. So it's just being in touch with yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up your those examples, because that's one of the questions I ask in retreats to help people get clear about that is, how did you play as a child? And it's so funny how many teachers or people who are in some kind of teaching role as kids, they used to, you know, set up all their stuffed animals or their dolls as a classroom and teach. In my case, I was an altar boy, and and you know, by default, because our older sister, you know, somehow we knew without anybody saying that in the Catholic environment in which we grew, that being a priest wasn't available for her. So by default, I became the priest, and my younger brother, was my altar boy. And so we used to play church and deliver services. And it's interesting that I'm not ordained, don't feel the need to be by any organization or anyone, but I know that that I fulfill that priestly role in the sense of helping people connect to their inner essence, to the sacred, to whatever you want to call it.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that. And I love that you asked people what they were doing as children, because as a child also, I had chairs set up in my backyard.
You did.
English. I used to bring everybody a journal, you know, those little, you know, composition books, used to give them all paper, and I'm still doing the same thing. Like, nothing has changed.
That's amazing. I love that.
They used to, you know, and this was the 60s, and these kids would come, they'd have a full day at school, and they'd come to my house because I'd give them, you know, lemonade or something in a journal, and I would have them write stuff. And that was way before I even started journaling. I was teaching them English. It's really interesting to look back at our childhoods.
That is incredible that you were teaching journaling even before you started journaling.
Yes.
That is wild.
I knew that it was a good thing. I knew because I knew that my mother and my grandmother journaled, and they talked about it. And I was teaching older kids. I was like 8 or 9, and I was teaching most of the kids were older than me. And yes, it's very interesting. Yeah.
So one more question. I know you've been married for 44 years. Share some of the secrets of a successful relationship and longevity in relationships.
Oh boy, you didn't tell me you would ask this question. I'm not prepared for this one. Well, I would say, number one, open communication. Open communication is really important. Expressing your needs, expressing what's in your heart center, not playing games, allowing one another to grow in the direction they want to grow. And I think most of the reasons people fall apart, or great reason, is that one person has a dream that the other one that won't allow or just won't honor. And I think love has to be at the core. I mean, we knew it was love at first sight. You know, I was a bad teenager, like I said before. My parents sent me to Canada to work in my husband's father's farm, and we saw he was managing the farm, my husband, and we just looked at each other, and he had this big afro, and I was like a hippie with rings on every finger and tight jeans, and we looked at each other and went, "Oh wow!" And I knew that minute. I'm like, "Okay, I think I'm going to spend the rest." I intuited I'm going to spend the rest of my life with this man. There was something in this energy.
Wow.
So I believe you don't have two chances to make a first impression. I believe love grows, but I also think, there's got to be love at the basis of any relationship. Bingo.
Mm. That's
Then
amazing that you knew.
Oh, I knew. I knew. Yeah, I knew. And I actually, because I was only 18, I'm like, oh, I'm not ready to settle down. I want to have more fun. So we, parted ways for a bit and then came back together. But I knew, yeah, again, I thought I was too young, but I knew.
Wow. Congratulations. That
Thank you.
says a lot.
Thank you. 3 great.
So that's great. So we'll have a link and connect people to your website for anybody who wants to do deeper work with you, or order your books. And I also know that you mentioned that you were going to give a gift, a PDF. Would you let us know about that as a way to encourage people to getting on your email list and finding out more about your work?
Sure. Yes, I have a monthly newsletter which comes out the first of the month. And so if you you want me to say what the PDF is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just talk about what it's about. Yeah, what the gift is that you're offering.
Well, I'm offering 10 tips on writing an inspirational memoir. So that'll be the PDF that you get if you listen to my talk. And I have to think I probably will have some kind of special bonus, which I haven't thought about yet, if you sign up for my newsletter. But my
Beautiful.
newsletter is really, it's basically has musings, it has poems, it has links to articles that I've loved, it has book recommendations, and any events that I'm involved in is posted in my newsletter. So, and it changes every month. So people look forward to it. It's inspiring people, I've told. So
yeah, and good information like the one today on suicide. I didn't know.
thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you for making time for us, for the summit, for sharing your wisdom, both the big picture and the practical next steps. We really appreciate your time and your generosity.
Thank you. Namaste, and peace to you and yours.
It's
breaking the dark, piercing the night, made to shine, bringing the world a radiant light.